A massive welcome to my panelists, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce futurist Peter Geldenhuys. Peter, if you could come up to the floor. We also are joined by Craig Wing, who is a futures strategy and scenario planning expert. Craig, if you could also do us the pleasure of joining us on the digital stage. And we round off our panel with Llewellyn Vance, a startup ecosystem lead at Huawei Singapore. Llewellyn, please do join us on the virtual stage. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Now, we've got quite the task ahead of us, and I'm not going to waste any more time. And I want us to anchor into the conversation. And Peter, I'm going to start with you in laying the land of what brings us all today, is getting an understanding of the technology that has disrupted exponentially so how we engineer, how we innovate, how we work, how we are thinking about the future. What is artificial intelligence, and what is it about how super or narrow or general it is that should have us paying attention?
Thank you so much, Viu. So briefly, AI refers to any type of computer software or mathematical model that engages in human-like activities like learning, planning, and problem solving, and so forth. And the real revolution started about 10 years ago, 2012, where we started seeing that language recognition, we looked at handwriting recognition, and that's where we started utilizing some narrow AI, or what we call weak AI. This is called natural language processing, recurrent neural networks. So all of the things that you see on your phone, for example, if you grab your phone and you say, identify my face, all of those became algorithms after we trained the models on the data. So what's really powerful about these AI models is that once the linkages between the variables are found in the network, we can then create a small little software program that can do that for you. And you don't need AI anymore because it has done its job in identifying and optimizing the model, similar to what we use on our phones when we speak to it and it can recognize our language. So that's narrow AI. When we talk about the general AI or the stronger AI, this is where we can, or some people call it AGI, artificial general intelligence. This is where we have a type of AI that where we have a mathematical model that understands, learn, and apply knowledge from a variety of fields. And one of the key elements is these large language models. Now, because we use language to convey meaning, to talk to each other, we're now seeing that these large language models is giving us a flickering of artificial general intelligence. Now, what's very important is how these transformer models work. Maybe a bit later we'll go a bit deeper into that if the panel wants it, or if the audience wants us to. But what's fascinating is if you go to a ChatGPT and say, you create the right persona and you say, I want you to explain a mathematical theorem to me, but you need to have the persona of a mathematician, then explain a mathematical theorem. And it would do that. If you say you're an artist and then say explain it, you get a completely weird answer. So it's very important, the type of prompts that you put into these models, because it will then know where to go and obtain the most optimal answer. And this is where, and I think Craig mentioned it, prompt engineering, or Ellen as well, is that prompt engineering then enables us to get a more cohesive answer, not 100% exact, but more cohesive if we ask it the right questions. And when we talk about artificial superintelligence, this is where an intelligence would actually exceed human intelligence. And this becomes really problematic, because right now, a large language models is fundamentally a mathematical model that allows computers to understand the meaning of language. And that is a big breakthrough, because as we use language as our main means of communication, this is what gives us that flickering of artificial general intelligence. We don't, however, know if this model will be strong enough in order to lead us into different fields, and therefore AGI and ASI is future projections of what it might be. That's a brief overview of those definitions. Back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Peter, for that. And I think what's very clear is that we are very much in the AI and the AGI, and what I think is making people also very excited and maybe angst about it is the implications or the opportunities, if you will, of ASI. And hopefully we won't get there too fast, but as we're still trying to just figure out and the in-between of AI and AGI. So thank you so much for that, Peter. And we will be diving a little bit deeper on the various types of those intelligences and how we could apply them for businesses, but also for the multiple stakeholders who are a part of the conversation. Llewellyn, I'm going to borrow a quote from you in which you say you're not going to be disrupted by ChatGPT. Instead, you're going to be disrupted by someone who knows how to use it. And in reference to what Peter just said, I'm positive that this is applicable to the exercise of any product or any, that sits under the umbrella of AI innovation. The sentiment is usually disrupt or be disrupted. Paint the picture of this disruption. Is it pivoting? Is it integration? Is it incremental innovation? And what is the opportunity cost of not mapping out the value proposition of such disruption for your business?
Thank you, Vuyo. And I must confess that quote is not mine. I don't know whose it is, but I did take it and use it because it made a lot of sense and it resonated. So, I think to answer your question, there's three ways I will bucket that response. And the first is in my own personal capacity. So I head up the startup ecosystem in Singapore for Huawei. And if I look at how I consult with startups and what used to take me 3 weeks to map out a value proposition canvas, a product market fit, a go-to-market strategy, a solution design, I'm able to do that in 2 hours. So, if you think about the time saved for me to do really comprehensive work in my respective field, I've reduced that lift completely, and I've got insights and feedback that is broader than I would have maybe been able to do by myself over a longer period of time. So that's the first part of my answer, is that, in any respective field, each and every person can take this technology, leverage it, and become more efficient and have a quicker time to value for their respective customer or task. The second part is, if I look at what I'm doing with startups, we have a few thousand startups that come into our ecosystem, and the ability to sit with a startup and go back to the basics of understanding what is their core product, what is their product market fit, and then to leverage, for example, ChatGPT to innovate further within that product market fit and to recommend how they could innovate to that target market, what technologies could potentially be added to enrich their IP or their value proposition, is insane. And, the outputs that I'm getting as I'm enriching these discussions with my startups is really giving them a product roadmap that will help them differentiate. And it's very specific, and it helps connect the dots on all the other leading edge technologies that are out there. So from a startup lens perspective, it's fundamentally changing the rate at which we can help startups innovate their product market fit and make sure that they have a stronger value proposition for their go-to-market strategy. The third bucket is really the work that we're doing with enterprise, because we interlock in all of our startups with enterprise. And one of the exercises we just recently did with a big telco in Singapore is we held a design thinking workshop with them to figure out what are the pain points that exist across the different divisions. So we worked with their product team, their sales team, their data team. And as per any big corporate, they're all siloed and they're all working against each other. And going through this design thinking workshop, we fleshed out about 15 different use cases which we could solve through the application of a cognitive AI solution that could fundamentally stitch together those different divisions and give them proactive solutions that they could help differentiate or become more efficient or reduce risk against. So to sum it up, I think that the opportunity to to enrich your value proposition. The opportunity to become more efficient, to differentiate, has never been more available. And it's really up to the people that are responsible for these respective roles in the organization to embrace the technology, in my opinion, and leverage it to set yourself apart from the rest. Thank you. Back to you.
Absolutely. And I think what made me smile as you were talking about design thinking and proactiveness is how much that still is important for enrichment, and not thinking just about the technology, but particularly, as you're saying, how it can add value to the work that is already being done. And Craig, as Llewellyn is mapping, this disruption piece of the puzzle, which does require innovation, this innovation that has us going back to the drawing board, and in startup or rather corporate innovation, the bean bags, the writable walls, which is really, really important in how we're thinking about doing business, incremental or disruptive innovation rather to business models. Your work is centered on emergent business models and the future of work. And as we mentioned earlier, there's this undeniable and palpable excitement and angst around the catalytic possibilities, as Llewellyn just mentioned, of how artificial intelligence tools can unlock this enterprise value. How do we differentiate against the different types of artificial intelligence that Peter kickstarted the conversation on earlier, and specifically the ones relevant to unlocking the enterprise value? And is cost an important factor?
Sure, a lot to unpack there, Vuyo. Thanks for that question, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I think Peter's given us a very good overview around artificial narrow, general, and super intelligence to a certain degree, right? But I think before I start that, I think from my perspective, I think it's important to frame the conversation around the lexicon of artificial intelligence, right? Even just the use of the word artificial intelligence has the connotation that it is some kind of intelligence that is almost supersedes us, specifically when you start moving towards general and super. It's not artificial intelligence per se, but it's a replication of what's come before. Specifically, as Peter mentioned, when you started having a look at things like large language models, the training set. So in many respects, it's an extrapolation of what is out there that's been refined and taken out the outliers to a certain degree, right? Now, I cast my mind back to circa 2004, 2005, to the first company that I had started, which was Envision Systems. And back then already, we're talking, as much as I don't want to admit it, we're talking 18 odd years ago. I was working around optical character recognition systems, around binary edge conditions, and around speech recognition, right? At that stage already, I was training fundamentally, essentially at that stage, artificial narrow intelligence, which had the ability to recognize the boundary conditions of a letter, and therefore by mapping it onto what was there, was saying this is an O, and this is an N, and an M, and an F, as opposed to a whatever character it may be, right? So the training systems that underpin this allow us to determine where we're going to move it into a use case. So the first is that piece. It's around the lexicon. But the use of artificial narrow intelligence, as Peter said, has been around for years and years and years. I myself, as I said, I've been playing around with this for the last 15 years. For an enterprise and moving into the future, I think the right question is to ask is not so much about the what, but it's about the how and the why, right? So the why is a very easy one. The why is around saying, well, do we use technology and do we use AI specifically? But here, we can say AI is a proxy for technology, which could be RPA. It could be any number of other different computer and algorithm processes such as natural language processing, computer vision, etc., etc. So the first question is, why are we doing this? Is it a question of saying performance optimization, in which case, yes, without a doubt, the technology, the algorithms will be able to do it better than you can, right? So if that's the perception or the rationale, and that leads to a capital outcome, i.e. how do we maximize the outcome in terms of maximizing our profit, then without a doubt, you're going to be using this from an enterprise perspective value, right? To your question, is the question around cost? Absolutely true, and that cost equation is very simple. The cost equation there is when the price of capex of the technology becomes less than the opex of people, you replace the people. Very easy, right? So that's the why. Now the how becomes very interesting, because the how, we can go a step further and say, within the different kinds of AI, and again, Peter spoke about narrow AI. I'm not going to explain all of these, but there's things like machine learning around really learning in terms of finding embedded flows, embedded characteristics. That goes even further around deep learning. We have things like cognitive computing, which allows us to almost give a version of the human being, all the way through to stuff like generative AI. right? So the how is also not that difficult. You can say, how do we use these things? How do we differentiate it? Well, it really is on a use case by basis, a use by use basis, right? But to come back to your exact question, and I want to go a step further because it's not just about enterprise value. For me, it's beyond the enterprise value. It's about the human value and the importance of humans in this entire equation. And why that's important is, again, is if we go back and we say AI is based and predicated around what you train it on, right? So large language models is what it's trained on. Essentially, then what it explicitly means is when you look at it from the purest form, AI is unable to give you new. It's able to give you what you think you want. Hence, stuff like Midjourney can create lovely interpretations, lovely visuals, lovely things based off the best possible outcome. But for unlocking enterprise value is inextricably linked with saying, what is human value, i.e., what is the role of the human being? And for that, I think you start getting into a very interesting space which starts to differentiate between the value of a human being and the value of a machine, where a machine can automate and it can do optimization very well, but the human's about the new. It's about creativity, it's about the innovation, and it's about that humanness stuff. So for enterprises to unlock value, it's about understanding where to use AI, obviously once we know the why, but more importantly, how do you augment that human stuff, that humanness with the artificial intelligence? That is the key for unlocking enterprise value. I don't think it's a zero-sum game. It's about augmenting both and understanding the key areas where both have their benefits and both have their pitfalls.
Absolutely. And Peter, before I go back to you, Llewellyn, I see you nodding quite vigorously to what Craig is saying. And, as we're talking human value, as we're talking about, the many rather different variants of AI, a question has just come through, which I think is quite relevant as we're talking about the consciousness of artificial intelligence. Will there be a lot of people, as we're thinking about, pardon, I just lost the question, but the question was really looking to the consciousness of AI and the pace at which it's growing, the pace at which it is progressing. What attention and what consideration can we pay attention to that as we're thinking about human value, as we're thinking about wanting to unlock that?
Yeah, I think it's a very sensitive space, and I'm always hesitant to be flippant or callous in my response, because on the one hand, I 100% agree with what Craig has emphasized, and it's about finding that synergy between human and AI. But in the same breath, I think if we look at the progress of humanity as we've moved through the different industrial revolutions, we've seen this adoption of technologies that has displaced jobs. Before the car, there were people that had to clean up after the horses and fix the carriage, the wheels on the carriages. And then the car arrived and that whole industry was decimated. And that principle applies as we move forward in time. So in my humble opinion, I think that we have this eternal challenge as a species to continuously upskill, and that we have to, within our different structures as corporates, as enterprise, SMEs, and as individuals, stay relevant, and to make sure that we put programs in place to upskill people and to relook at your organization with AI as a central strategy that has a top-down strategy. And in that strategy, to make sure that you identifying where AI is maybe going to displace jobs, and potentially look at how you can take those people and upskill them or reskill them to either leverage AI or to supplement a different part of the business. Now, I know it's not that simple. It's a lot more complicated, and it's a very sensitive topic. I know people that are on the call that are going through this very challenge at the moment within their respective roles, and it's a difficult challenge to face. But in my experience, it is something that can be achieved if you have a proper learning and development program embedded into your organization, and if there is thought leadership within the organization. And if it's completely overwhelming, because whenever I deal with a CTO or a CEO, it's this perfect storm of dealing with your Frankenstack, which is your legacy technologies, and trying to figure out how do you integrate what you've had. So going from analog to digital, adopting all of these technologies. What do you adopt? How do you adopt it? How do you integrate it? How do you get your technology to serve your strategy? And the only way you can do that is to get ahead of it and to meet with thought leaders such as Peter or Craig, and to understand how to build a strategy around AI, and then to look at what parts of the business are going to be impacted and take proactive measures to upskill and pivot accordingly. I hope that answers the question.
No, absolutely it does, and I hope it answers the question that the recipient had asked. And I think proactiveness is becoming a theme throughout this conversation, but also bringing in monitoring and evaluation, the learning and development piece of it. And Peter, I think, as we're leaning into this realization of AI, and particularly with a whole of questions that are coming through, is looking at the workforce, looking at job displacement, looking at the ethical piece of it, and being humans, not wanting to be left behind. How does AI differ from AGI? And in this breath, wanting us to unpack this AGI readiness, and the question being, how do businesses, large to small, corporates to startups, who don't want to end up being swallowed by this catalytic and exponential disruption of AGI, prepare for it?
So one of the key challenges we faced, and when we launched our AI Masterclass program, was to create a platform where the normal individual without any engineering or technical or mathematical background is able to understand how these models work, because you need to demystify how AI works. If you don't demystify it, then someone can't make a decision based on where this will have an impact on the organizations. Now, I hope that I can share my screen briefly, but you'll see that on the screen, this is a quick overview of some of the major AI models and its impact on the market. You'll see in the last couple of years, this unbelievable increase in reading comprehension and language understanding. That's the large language models. And those large language models is nothing other than a mathematical model trained on a tremendously large data set. And the beauty of these models, to make it really, really simple, is that ChatGPT is a massive parrot, but it's got 3 tools or 4 tools that enabled it to be a very, very good parrot. And I hope that my text is showing correctly on your side. On my side, it's inverted. But
sorry, Peter,
when we talk
Peter, before you continue, for anyone that's listening, if you double click on Peter's screen, you should be able to have it as a full view to see the detail.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Len. So what you see on the screen is embedding. Remember, we've got tokenization, embedding, positional encoding. Now, what does embedding mean? Embedding means we take a sentence, and if words are used interchangeably in a sentence, the AI model will then embed them close together. So, for example, bicycle and truck and car will be close together, and apple and banana would be positioned close together. But this is not a 2x2 model. Oh no, this is a 4096 by 4096 dimensional model that actually positions all of these words close together, and it clusters these words. Now, once those words are clustered, that means the embedding is taking place. Then we take a look at the structure of sentences. And what is interesting is that these massive amount of words are then clustered in a multi-dimensional space. But the important thing is this: if you have a sentence, you look at other words to give meaning to it. I can say the bank of the river, or I put my money in a bank. In both cases, bank means something completely different. So we take a look at the other words in the sentence to give it meaning, and then we take a look at where it is, and that's called positional encoding. At that point in time, what does a transformer model do? Based on the prompt you give it for its encoder, it will then go and take a look at words that is adjacent to the words that you want to do. So let me give you a brief example. If I, for example, say, the best thing about artificial intelligence is its ability to, you type that into ChatGPT. What will happen is that the words that are most likely to follow next in the sentence, and that's literally what a transformer does, it builds an answer word by word by word by word. It looks at the words with our highest level of probability and puts it next. So if you make the temperature of your setting 0, it'll choose the most probable words to come next. If you make the temperature setting higher, which in most cases it is, like 0.4, you can choose any of those words. If you make the temperature really high, all of those words come into play. And this is what's really interesting, because if I now type in a question and Llewellyn does the same and Craig does the same, we could get completely different answers, because the probability of choosing a word would then mean that that choice of word leads to the choice of the next word, which leads to the choice of the next word. Now imagine that. A small deviation in the beginning leads to a completely different result. And this is what makes AI such a fascinating model. We need to realize it's a mathematical model that allows us to understand language. That's it. Now, getting back to your question, how can we harness this? Well, as part of our AI masterclass, we thought to ourselves, you know what? We need to think like a startup. You start at the beginning, and then you use AI tools on your entire journey. And similar to what Craig and what Leon have said, it's unreal, the productivity you can unleash using these models, but knowing that sometimes it's a lot of nonsense and it's a lot of fluff, except if your prompts are better. Because if your prompts are more accurate, then the choice of words that it would give you back would be more contained, and the chance of it giving you fluff is definitely less. But that's why you still need a human in the ecosystem. So I'm going to give you a brief 2-minute case study. What we've done is we decided, what type of app can we build using these models? And we came up with the idea of an app that you can dictate your text, and then in 10 seconds, convert your text into a professional email that sits in your email inbox ready to be sent. So we thought, let's go build that. And then we see what we can do. You know what? The name came up through AI. So we said, hey, give us names that can do this. And ChatGPT said, yes, try Agent Zero. We said, oh, we like that. That's cool. And then we said, okay, but based on brand archetypes, this is what the app does. It's an app that you literally record your voice, it converts it into AI, and it's ready to be sent in the email box. What type of brand archetype would you suggest for this? Guess what brand archetype it suggested? The magician. So we said, oh, that's interesting. So from, the everyman, the hero, it said, no, let's use the magician archetype. And then we said, all right, give us some ideas around the text for our branding. Well, we talk about a magical email assistant. We talk about being amazed. The images we use is like a magical key element that magically provides it. And then we ask it to say, the brand color. What would that be? What type of colors would you use for a magician? And they gave it to us. It actually gave us the unique indications of what I had to give to the graphic artist around the color images. But then we go one step further. I, for example, can go to Llewellyn's Twitter feed, right? I can scrape it, and then I can ask ChatGPT, listen, I want you to analyze Llewellyn's personality profile for me. It does it literally in 10 seconds. So it can tell me on the Ocean model, this is what Llewellyn's profile is. Then I can say, okay, I want you to rewrite this message so that it resonates with him. Now, remember Cambridge Analytica a few years ago? You had to pay them like $100 million in order to identify the personality profiles of individuals and then roll out advertising linked to each one of them. We can do it by having a little scraper on your Windows platform or on your Apple platform, and using ChatGPT, you can do the exact same thing, enabling smaller organizations to have 6 different advertisements. And it's not what the company wants you to hear. It is how you see the world. That's the image you get. And that's another example of how this works. So what is fascinating is from the word go, where you have an idea, to building an entire ecosystem and support it, similar to what Llewellyn and Craig have said, is that you can use these tools to unlock unbelievable value. And we can be here all day to talk about the wonderful things that it can do. And it's not only about, and here's the key message, it's not about making what we already do more efficient. It's about enabling things that would never have been possible. For example, the personalization of your messages to an audience out there, so that even as a small company with 10 people, your communication to them can now be changed and modified to align with how they perceive the world, which means that resonance between who you are and how you perceive the information is optimized. I think I've said enough. Let me hand over to my fellow my fellow presenters.
You absolutely and I'm going to allow you to just interject, Llewellyn, in just a moment. But Peter, I think making it really practical to the particular tasks at hand for not only businesses, but a question that's also coming through is the types of jobs that humans would focus as AI takes on the more basic tasks. Llewellyn, I'm going to go to you, and then to Peter, and then Craig.
Yeah, Peter, thanks for that. It's something that I just thought of, and again, I come back to that discussion where we're doing workshops with a lot of enterprise, and there's one consistent theme coming through, which is, where do we start with all of this, right? And what do we focus on? It's an onslaught of technology. The rates, I wake up, I get anxious at the pace at which AI is moving, because I feel like I cannot keep up. And, I can only imagine we're sitting within the C-suite. Where do we start? And the methodology that I recommend for anyone on the call that's having that type of concern is the coming back to the design thinking methodology to figure out what is the applicable use case in your business. And the best way to do that is to go through an exercise with your respective teams to understand what is your North Star from a mission statement perspective. What do you want to achieve within the next 3 years? To understand what's holding you back from being able to achieve that. And then to understand what are the different solutions you could potentially embed to reach that North Star, and to qualify and rate the different potential use cases that you could solve through the application of technology or AI. The risk I think any enterprise or person faces on the call is developing the wrong solution that is not applicable for the market, or not applicable for your business or specific target market. And I would really provide a lot of recommendations to make sure that is focused on in your strategy. Back to you, Vuyo.
And in that, Llewellyn, because I think there's a lot of anxiousness and a lot of scrambling of, there's so many jobs being lost. And there is this inherent focus, of course, on C-suite, on the leaders, on the innovators. But what about the people who are taking notes from the leaders, who are design thinking these solutions, who are design thinking these products that are coming out? What should they be focusing on? What should the workforce be focusing on so that they don't become obsolete? Llewellyn?
Sure, that's a tough one. I think if you look at all the new jobs that are emerging, you can Google it and you can see that there's, I think anywhere between, the last time I checked, 40 to 60 new different types of job titles for the different emerging technologies. If we look at AI through the AI lens, the key word that's coming through now is prompt engineer, but that's relevant to someone who's specializing in AI. So what do you do with the workforce that you have, and how do you make them relevant? I suspect, and I'll open it to the rest of the panel here, but I suspect it's relevant to the industry you're in, the vertical you're in, and the layers of the jobs within that vertical or industry. And to align and make sure you have a good L&D department and a good L&D thought leader that can help you map out the future upskilling or jobs that may be applicable, and how you can kind of meet that objective. Craig, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I do. And I want to piggyback on something that you said before, Llewellyn, around the whole drive during the industrial age, right? There was a group of folks in the early 1800s. They were called the Luddites, and I'm sure the panel knows about this. In fact, I'm certain that you, but the listeners may not, right? And the Luddites were very interesting. They were textile workers. And in the early 1800s, they were really against machines and automation, specifically against the spinning loom. Because the view was, here's a spinning loom, here's a machine that can replace us, right? Which is not dissimilar from the thoughts we have right now. And their whole view is, if we can go to the factories, break all these damn machines, we'll be okay. Obviously, unfortunately, history tells us, and we know this, they weren't successful. And the same thing holds true today. So the first thing is, unfortunately, you can't stop the march of technology. You will never be able to do. Whether it's through regulation, through governments, whether it's through burning technology, whether it's slowing down progress. The point is, technology has always been there. We just called it something else. Right at the very beginning, we called it the wheel. We called it fire, so on and so forth, the internet, cell phones. And through every single one of those major changes, to what you said before, the fact of the matter is that more jobs are created in new sectors as opposed to the individual job loss. So prime example, the mechanization and the automation of farmland through steam engines. Yes, the farmer has lost the job if you're that farmer without the ability to transition to a new set of skills, but wholesale, the automotive sector had created more jobs than there were in terms of loss of jobs in farming. Now, if that paradigm holds true for today in terms of the relevance of the human being, then it's a simple answer. It's simple, at least philosophically, not simple to implement. And specifically from your world, coming in from the world of a startup, it's the same thing from the human being. What value do I add? Right? That's really the crux of the matter over here. What value do I add today? And more importantly, what value do I create going into the future? What that then means is a rejig of essentially the human operating system. It's a rejig of your ability to say, this is what I know, but as we know, the saying goes, what got us here doesn't get us there. And therefore, it's not just a game around, being technologically advanced, etc. This becomes a game of resilience. It becomes a game of resilience and adaptability, where the human being has the ability to say, how do we toggle and how we learn pretty friggin' quickly as things change over time. And then we can start having the conversation, which is another complete Pandora's box around the role of a formal 4-year education versus microbytes or learning on demand, right? Because when you speak about the resilience angle and the applicability of the human being in time moving forward, it's then the ability to say, what is the value I add today? And from a futurist perspective, the work that I'm doing my PhD in, it's about saying, how do I create future value, the latent value that isn't even available today? How do I start creating that today for anticipation of tomorrow?
Absolutely. And Craig, I'm going to come back to you as we talking about scenario planning and getting ready to wrap up. But before I do that, Peter, I know you're engaged with business schools. And as we're talking about the future value that Craig just alluded to and the workforce, and all of the current buzz around AGI, what are business schools thinking, or what should they be thinking as they are crafting not only the employees, but also the business leaders who will be in charge of design thinking this future of work?
So it depends on the personality of the people in these business schools and those who lead them. Some are early adopters, Jeffrey Moore's model. But, I have to give full marks to Craig in explaining creative destruction. The Schumpeter's model around at the same time you create, you destroy as well. And there's this concept of creative destruction that will be quite important to understand in the years ahead. I think a starting point would be to say, understand what AI is, understand its limitations and a basic foundation of how it works, and then get a foundation of how to use it to make your existing operations far more efficient, similar to what Llewellyn is doing. He gave excellent examples around how he's making his life more productive. Now, my question is, Llewellyn, what are you now doing that you have, you got an entire week open every month? What do you do now? And that's that unique idea between machine thinking and human thinking, and understanding what the difference is, understanding what the combination of the two is, what we call augmented intelligence, which is really cool. And then asking ourselves, by understanding the capabilities of machine thinking, like pattern recognition and facial recognition, wonderful things it can do far better than we can, let's go and improve who we are. Let's go and improve our brain power. Let's improve what makes us unique. And then we use the available time to unlock opportunities that wasn't possible before. And I think that's where business schools need to be positioning themselves, by saying, understand the foundation, understand how to interact and link with machine learning, and what makes you unique as a human that will help you to unlock value that gives you the competitive advantage. I think that is and that's also the philosophy we did with our masterclass, to say those are the foundations around we will build our training program.
Thank you, Peter. And Craig, as we're unlocking this value and getting into the scenario planning for businesses, for societal adoption of AGI, and keeping in mind that the business and the client of the future is very much still human and very much still physical, what are some of the key regulations and the legal challenges? There was a question that was posed to security concerns of proprietary data that has been engaged in. But what are some of these challenges that businesses will foresee in implementation? And the second layer also being that governments, if they want to champion AGI and AI and its multiple facet as they implement.
Yeah, so just a slight sneaky fun remark is perhaps the customer of the future is not a human, it's actually a machine that automates decisions on your behalf. But let's not go down that rabbit hole. I think that's a complete different conversation, right? So some of the concerns to think about, obviously the first one is the ethical and safety concern, very simply put, right? And again, if you premise that off the condition or the premise that it's a pattern recognition machine, then it becomes a simple kind of computer science data problem of garbage in, garbage out. And for that, look at the 2000s, the early, the late 2000s of the Google, where they were indexing the image search. And we know it's a terrible example, but it's very true, where the training sets were around, is this a gorilla or not? And because the training sets are biased, and they were certainly back then, where they're easily recognizable around Caucasian faces, it misinterpreted the faces of gorillas as Africans, right? So there's a challenge around that, around the ethical concerns, because we've trained it incorrectly, either because the data sets are flawed, and all the explicit or implicit biases of our researchers, right? There's a saying, AI is racist, it's sexist, discriminatory. Not always the case. In many specific cases, it's because of the poor data that we have. So there's a huge area around the ethics around the use of technology, and that's a masterclass, and I'm sure Peter covers many times in his courses around the ethics around that. Beyond that, the question around data governance is absolutely key as well, because data is the oil, as they say. I don't want to say it's the new oil, because I think that's a lovely saying that captivates our mind. But data becomes super important because, again, the person that owns the best kinds of data in the context, again, of garbage in, garbage out, is the one that wins. So data security becomes a problem, because if you leak that data, you end up in a situation much like we had last week with Samsung saying to the employees, hey, you can't use ChatGPT. Stop uploading public data onto, ChatGPT. The same as the Italian government saying, please, we're not going to ask you. We're just going to cut it, right? Because of the potential around data leaks and the misconception, or maybe the truancy around the use of data and enriching that data set. Beyond that, the question of regulation becomes problematic, at least certainly in terms of the interpretation of regulation today. Regulation, like law, is based off case precedents. It's based off, this is what happened in the past, how to extrapolate and apply the law now. Now we get into a realm where, with technology moving so quickly, we don't have precedents. Simple questions like IP and copyright protection, who owns certain things, who owns music when AI can replicate it, right? For that, again, we can have a look at 2 weeks ago, was it last week? In fact, it was this week. Ed Sheeran and Marvin Gaye, right? Where Marvin Gaye's, his trust, I think it was, said, you're copywriting around the chord progression. And Ed Sheeran said, well, if you think about it, most songs actually have a certain kind of chord progression. So we're starting to move into a realm now where all the old rules of regulation aren't necessarily fit for purpose because they don't move fast enough, right? So that becomes a challenge. Regulatory, over and above that, over and above the data, over and above the ethics, there's obviously the questions around workforce displacement, which I see there's some of the questions. And do we move into a UBI system? Again, that's another conversation for another day, where we tax the machine owners and that money flows down. Or was that actually just a proxy to make the rich richer? I don't know. That's another fascinating conversation for another day. But for the government one, this is where the government question becomes really interesting, because we see signs of this already, right? We see what's coming on. And the author, William Gibson, says the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And for that, have a look at places like China, where they look at the use of data and they can say, underpinned by large LLM models, we can start determining a social score in terms of what you're doing, and therefore will reward you and change the human behavior. So if you jaywalk, we're going to deduct points. If you are friends with someone who's unscrupulous, your social score goes down. And once you break the ceiling, or rather you break the floor of a certain number of points, you can't have access to certain services. Governmental-wise, that's a huge issue, because it allows us to justify the action of certain things, certain players in the role, in terms of the roles that they play, right? So now data gives us the ability, if used incorrectly, stuff. But from a government, or more importantly, from a block level, the blocks, the people, the countries, the organizations, the entities, the players with the most data are the ones that win. And from a government perspective, right now, I would say the US and the West is maybe advanced because of the advancement of technology, but because of the nature of displacement of technology, I'm concerned about closed ecosystems. Let me not say which countries, but closed ecosystems where they have the mandate to ensure that the government level, the national level, has the right for all that data. Because the ones with the data have the ability to then control a narrative, much like Peter's view. And again, look to the future, look at next year, already to this year. We've seen that the Republicans in the US have used AI to create customize AI-generated adverts. But the point is, from a government level, it becomes really incumbent to say we need to establish regulatory constraints in terms of where we use data, what are we using it, and more importantly, what's the use of AI to misinformation for misinformation purposes, or more importantly, just plain and simply for controlling our own populace. It becomes a huge, gigantic space.
Absolutely. A huge, gigantic space, but also a huge question that I think you've done justice to. Llewellyn, I am going to allow just 30 seconds for you to add value to the conversation because we have to start wrapping up.
Got you. So, Peter, I just want to pose a question to you just for the audience, because a lot of the discussion has been on AI. And I think one of the things that keeps me awake is the emergence of AGI, artificial general intelligence. And there's different layers to this. And I think the concern I have is we have one shot to make sure that we align AI at a value, a principle, and a human-centered approach before AGI unlocks and gets out the box, for lack of a better term. Can you share some final thoughts around that, and just for the audience to understand the difference between AI, AGI, and the potential risks there?
It's going to be a tough one. And we don't know if the current mathematical models will take us into AGI. We're seeing sparks of that because suddenly we see AI moving across domains using these large language models. The question is, what is intelligence? What is wisdom and knowledge? And these become difficult constructs. And I may come up with a solution that you may not like at all. So we are going to go into an environment where if we have these mathematical models that kind of define a specific way in which we as humans interact, or that can in a way encapsulate or embody a higher level of intelligence, we might be faced with a key problem that a number of people might not like it at all. Similar to any political, position that someone might take in, there is arguments for and against it. I believe it's going to be a very, very difficult journey because, we can't even right now define consciousness. We as humans, we don't know how to do it. Will it be possible for us to define consciousness in a mathematical model that works on a computer that is based on Boolean logic between a 0 and a 1? And can we reduce consciousness literally to zeros and ones, although there might be a few billion of them? That becomes the question from a technical perspective, and will it become a reality? It's very difficult to say. We're realizing that what we thought would be very, very difficult was actually far easier to do with these mathematical models. So we don't know. We don't know if the mathematical models that will emerge in the not too distant future will change that mindset. And, you asked me for a definitive answer. I'm saying, I don't know, because we don't know what the progress will be towards that model that we will see as an AGI or ASI.
Yeah,
Yes, super quickly. And I mean, I think a big part of this is actually around incentives, right? And the incentives you build into the machine, the algorithm technology in terms of output, right? And there's a very common case study. It's a bit of an anecdote. It's very short. I'll show it to you very quickly. It's called the paperclip problem, right? The AI paperclip problem. And essentially what the paperclip problem is assuming that we have this artificial super intelligence machine and you program the incentives, or you say this is what your goal is. It's goal maximization to create paperclips, and as many as you can, and high quality ones, right? So you have this fictitious machine, artificial super intelligent machine that can do it, that's linked to robotics and all the rest, right? And you go into the factory on the first day and it creates 100 paperclips. The next day it's 1,000. The next day it's 10,000. A week later it's making 1 million paperclips. Then you go in there 3 months later because you're making so much money, and the quality control person is dead on the factory floor. And you say to the machine, hey machine, why'd you kill the quality control person? What's going on? And he said, well, I killed the quality control person because I have up to absolute surety these are perfect paperclips. But the quality control person was questioning, is it perfect or not? And so the conversation I had with them was slowing down the production of paperclips. So I killed them. And not only that, I've spoken to you for 2 minutes. And remember, my gain function is to create paperclips. And so therefore, I've lost 2 minutes of production speaking to you. I'm going to kill you next. And you extrapolate that question into the future because the carbon forms all life, and that's what the paperclips are made for. And therein lies the whole thing that runs around, this machine that kills us all. So a big part of this as well is not just the algorithms, it's the intent and the goal and the gain function of what we want these machines to do. So if you weren't already a little bit gloom and doom, just think about the paperclip that you used this afternoon that may be the gateway to complete extinction of human race.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and I think as we are talking to the exponential track and the progress of this conversation as well, there's a lot of research and development. There's a lot of learning and development that is explicably is going to come out of this conversation. And unfortunately, I do have to cut the nip at the bud because of time. And I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. We have 3 minutes remaining of the conversation. And I want us to sum up this conversation of the boom or the doom of it. And I'm going to invite the panelists and give you 1 minute and be very strict on that to really capture a big takeaway, if you will, that you'd like the business leaders, the aspiring futurists, the innovators who are wanting to lead what has been a huge component of this conversation, value creation with artificial intelligence, with artificial general intelligence, and keeping in mind that they are designing for the future. Llewellyn, 1 minute, and then I'm going to pass the mic to Craig and then wrap it up with Peter.
Okay, so I think, thank you to everyone. It's been a thorough chat, and from my perspective, I believe that there's more boom than doom. I think that right now AI is a functional tool that you can leverage, and that if you're not engaging with it, you should rapidly upskill yourself. You can start, with the basics, some basic prompts in ChatGPT, for example. But if you really want to get ahead of the curve, is to bring in a thought leader into your business that can help shape a strategy, go into a design thinking workshop with your respective team, with your respective business, and figure out what's the compelling needs that you need to solve through the application of technology. So, from a benefits perspective, it's definitely there. I think the second point is to rapidly make sure that you're identifying the different roles that are going to be at risk within your organization, and to make sure that you've got an upskilling strategy that's being put into place. There are going to obviously always be some scenarios where you might actually have to cull jobs to be as operationally as efficient as possible. Peter, to answer your question, what am I doing with the extra time? There's more sweat equity. I'm doing more consulting, not less. So, that's the efficiency that's been opened up. And to close off on AGI, I think that is a concern for me. I believe that generally speaking, that we need to get more alignment of AI with some core baked-in principles to prevent the paperclip scenario. And I personally hope that governments step in to try and baseline all the different language models that are being developed, and make sure we don't end up with the worst case scenario. Thank you, Vio.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Llewellyn. Craig?
Yeah, really quickly. I mean, in artificial intelligence, boom or doom, I think I'll add a third option there. It depends what the room says, right? And I think that's the key piece, because fundamentally for me, it is a tool. And like all tools, it can be used for good and bad. But there is a piece in there, and I wholeheartedly agree with what Llewellyn's saying. A big part of this conversation is ignorance, or the opposite side of it is around wisdom and education. The opposite of intelligence is not. It's not a lack of intelligence. The opposite of intelligence is a thought, the perception that we have intelligent answers. So I would say a big part of this conversation is about saying, how can we get skilled? How do we get educated around this whole thing? That's number one, right? And the second thing is be engaged with it. And when I say engage with it, I mean play with it. Play with ChatGPT and learn a little bit more. Try to understand. It's only by having the information and an informed decision can we have the conversation, but do it with speed. Because I do think in a world that's exponential, as we know, it's slowly then quickly. Let's get into this and let's make sure our fingers and our hands are dirty. And so I would really say it's about using the tool where you see fit to become an artist, right? It's about educating yourself, and it's about engaging with the stuff.
Absolutely. Creating the enabling room so that you boom rather than doom. Peter?
So when we take a look at the future, there's fundamental changes in geopolitics, demographics, with peak consumption around the corner. We have changes in our economic models. All of these are mostly inflationary. What technology does, it makes it deflationary. It enables us to do things quicker, better, faster at a lower cost. It enables and forces people to adapt and to change. And although we as small organizations can't do anything about geopolitics and economic regimes, we can do something about the productivity of our organizations. And jointly, we can bring our forces together to create a more prosperous world, because if we can use the same amount of resources and have a far higher output, it leads to the prosperity of everyone, to Craig's point regarding the Luddites. That's a brief of my message. Stay current, understand the technology, get the new skills, and understand what the new opportunities are that you can unlock using this fascinating new technology. That's it from me.
Thank you so much, Peter. Very much in tune with the theme of today, which is really looking at how you can design and remember who you're designing for. If this value you're wanting to create, it does invite this open call to open innovation for impact optimization, as well as effectiveness. Various resources, various knowledge and perspectives have shaped this conversation, and I truly hope that it has presented you with the opportunity to reevaluate the possibilities and the value of artificial general intelligence, as you design, as you engineer a future that is inclusive, that is innovative, that is impactful for people, profit, and the planet.